All right. All right. Thank you, Tony, for hitting that record button. I see we've got folks from, oh, wow, all over Western New York, New York City, MHA, Long Island. That's where I'm from. Alabama. Wow. We've got some folks from Alabama. Cool. Great. More New Yorkers, Rochester,
California.
California.
Good morning, California.
That's right. You're just getting your day started over in California.
Oh, San Diego. I'm jealous.
Me too. That's actually one place I haven't been. Texas. Wow, great. Great to see so many people with us. All right. So Glenn, I know you have quite an ambitious agenda for us today. So
yeah.
If it's all right, why don't we go ahead and get things started?
All right, sounds good. I'll show how overwhelming burnout can be by putting my little automated video on. But
I like this video. Yes.
yeah.
All right. So welcome everyone to today's webinar, Combating Burnout. My name is Daniela Labate Cavelli. I'm from Niapris. It's great to see all of you with us today. We have just a couple of quick housekeeping things to get through before I turn it over to Glenn. So today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll find the slides and the recording posted on our website at www.niapris.org. If not tomorrow, by Monday. We are also going to be offering CEs for social work, CPRP, LMHC. Did I forget anybody? Social work, CPRP, and LMHC. Yep, exactly. And to qualify for those CEs, we ask two things of you. One, that you be on the webinar in the Zoom room for the entire duration so that we can make sure that you're eligible because you've stayed the entire time. And the other thing is that we ask that you complete an evaluation form. So you'll receive an evaluation form within 24 hours of the end of today's webinar. And we ask that you complete that evaluation form, click on the link in your email, return that form, and submit that within 48 hours so that you can be eligible for your CE, and just let us know which one you're asking for. The other thing is, we want to hear from Glenn, but we also want to hear from you. And I'm glad to see that we have quite an active group in the chat today. So we ask that you continue to use the chat throughout the presentation, chat in your questions, your comments, anything as they come to mind. I'll be sure to keep track of that while Glenn's speaking, and then he set aside some time at the end for Q&A. So we'll have some time at the end of his presentation for that. So if you just move us to the next slide, Glenn, I'll introduce you. So just a little bit about Glenn Karunis. You can read more, information about him on this slide. There's a whole lot about what he does. But the long and short of it is, we've been really lucky at Niapris to have known Glenn for a few years now. And we've had the pleasure of working with him in the past. He's presented for us in our Leadership Institute, as well as on our webinars. He did something on emotional intelligence. I want to say it was last year.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so we're so happy to have him back today to speak on this topic, which we think is very timely on burnout. Glenn has been working in the field of human resources, providing support to people in previous work through his hospital and health systems work. He is also the principal at Bonus HR and provides training and consultation in areas of HR, human resources, leadership, and organizational development. And he also teaches courses as an adjunct professor at Adelphi University in their MBA program. So that's a little bit about Glenn. He's also like a really cool, down-to-earth guy, and we really enjoy having him with us. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Glenn, and you can take it from here.
Well, great. Thanks, Daniela. And hi, everybody. I'm coming to you from, I was born and raised on Long Island, but now I live in Westchester. So, it seems we have a lot of the bases covered. But I just want to start out because one of the things that I've learned, certainly from my work with change management, is that, in order to really get people to stand up and notice, you've got to create a sense of urgency. So, the World Health Organization did that for us. So in 2019, in May of 2019, a little bit more than 3 years ago, they officially classified workplace burnout as an occupational phenomenon. Burnout is a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic work stress that has not been successfully managed. They've also emphasized that burnout is specifically work-related. So the term burnout really refers to the people's reactions to overt stress in the workplace. It should be applied to describe experiences. It should not be applied to describe experiences in other areas of life. Certainly, I've heard people say, I'm just burnt out in general, but it usually stems from their work life. It's characterized by a sense of exhaustion or depletion, mental distance from or negativity or cynicism about work, and ultimately results in decreased effectiveness. So the WHO came out with this, and all of a sudden, and I'm not talking about the Roger Daltrey, Pete Townsend WHO, by the way, I just wanted to clarify that for you. Although they probably could write a great song about burnout. But in any case, this is the World Health Organization. And frankly, this kind of ratcheted up people's interest in this. When I was with NQP, the PPS in Nassau, Queens in 2019, I worked with somebody some of you may know, a gentleman named Max Banalevi, and we worked on a pretty extensive workshop on workplace burnout. So over the years, I've refined it. It was well attended, and you're going to get a pretty good slice of it here today. So here we go after creating that sense of urgency. So, you may feel like your battery is completely drained. And I asked the rhetorical question. Certainly, you can put some comments in the chat if you'd like. Have you yourself experienced workplace burnout? Or even write down what's that felt like for you. So throughout the next hour or so, we're going to first look at the problem, then we'll explore potential solutions. So, a pretty pervasive issue, and fairly, frankly, commonplace. As recently as yesterday, I was working with a client, and people there seemed really stressed and frankly expressed to me that they were burnt out. And I said, what's this all coming from? Interestingly enough, they all started sort of pointing to the boss's office. I asked them to expound on that, of course. But, I felt for these people because they clearly were under a lot of stress. They felt that they needed to meet certain requirements and certain numbers. And as people often feel, they feel they didn't have enough people to do it, and to be able to get all the work done. And of course, as typically happens when you have an organization where a lot of people were burnt out, their turnover was higher than they would have liked. They recently just had some people who had left. So they were pretty stressed. I would say they probably met the classic definition of burnout. But let's first, as I'm sure and your finance people will tell you, you've got to have data, right? So first, let's highlight some of the data. The problem, as it were, of workplace burnout. So did you know that, for a younger group of employees ages 23 to 38, 62% in a recent survey said they felt pressure to be available, to be on for work around the clock. So, it's no longer your 8 to 4, 9 to 5. People feel very, very pressed that they have to be on, 24/7. There is something called, and there's several articles out there about something called literally Sunday night dread. And I think we've all felt it. When I was working full time, I was the chief HR officer at a number of different organizations. You'd start to feel that pit of your stomach start to cringe when Sunday night rolled along. Maybe that's why Sunday night football is so popular, is it kind of gets people's mind off the Sunday night dread. Just thinking about 80% of people said, yes, I experienced this. For millennials, it was 91%. So clearly there's an issue with people's beliefs about work, as well as some things in the workplace itself. And I'm going to try to explore some of that with you here today. 63% of those burnout have a greater likelihood of them taking a sick day. And, just to put this in kind of global perspective, huge study by Gallup, both in 2019 and 2020. The results were 2 out of every 3 full-time workers reported in 2019 experiencing workplace burnout. And in a more recent study, Gallup surveyed people again, and it was literally 3/4 of people who at least experienced some degree of workplace burnout at some point in time in their career. So this is pervasive. This is an issue. This is pretty widespread. So the numbers just validate that this is a very real problem, a very real challenge. I don't like it, people that might have heard me before, I don't like using the word problem because it kind of has a negative connotation. But workplace burnout is indeed a problem. I like to look at things more as a challenge or an issue, because I think just it sounds like it can be more surmountable that way. That said, you can recover from burnout. And in the second half of the presentation, I'm going to discuss some things that you can do. So, look, burnout really stems from people's mental state and mental health at work. Surveys were done. This is from, again, a big survey that was done in 2019. 61% of workers said their productivity was affected by mental health. 37% of workers said their work environment itself contributed to their symptoms. So, one of the takeaways here is burnout is kind of an amalgam of a couple of things. One is individuals and how they process things. The second one, however, is the work environment, the work that we do, the industry that we're in particular, when you're in healthcare, there is a particular amount of stress that I will at least touch upon here today. And there's ways to get much more information about that. So, you have those factors that come together that cause a lot of stress. When that gets to be too much, cause a lot of burnout. And then we have mental health crises at work. 64% of people indicated that their jobs were stressful. A full quarter have actually had a full-blown panic attack at work. And 41% of employees are diagnosed to have some kind of a mental health issue. Now, I think, we've all worked to try to eliminate some of the stigma around that. And that's, I think, a moray and a value that has changed over time. But still, it's not probably discussed as much as it could be in the workplace and provided support for in the workplace. I think it's changing in the positive direction to some degree because of the urgency that it's been given. Nevertheless, it is something that we have to pay strong attention to and provide much more support than has been provided in the past. So, what's the cost of burnout? So, being an old HR guy, I looked at some HR statistics, and when Kronos, which some of you may use for your timekeeping or some other things in the workplace, looked at the issue of burnout, 95% of HR people that they spoke to said that burnout really indeed has a negative effect on their organization, as well as a negative effect on their ability to retain people in the workforce. Burnout could be responsible for up to 50% of turnover. Now, interesting enough, this is from a 2019 study that I pulled this information. In a couple of slides, you'll see how that's been borne out even through 2020 and 2021. And cost estimates of burnout anywhere between 125 and 190 billion, yes, that's billion with a B, per year to American business. So it's a significant issue. And it's something that we just have to get our arms around, recognize it, and then take steps to do our best to lessen it, and then ultimately a couple things that you can do to eliminate it and certainly recover from it. What are the specific types of costs? Well, you have absenteeism, you have staffing, you have excessive workload. When people leave, that's one thing I hear from clients, and certainly when I was an HR person in healthcare, what you hear is, people are stressed out, people are burnt out, people leave, then for the people that remain, it's increased their workload extensively. And then frankly, then the cycle just keeps going. And then people get excessively stressed, get burnt out, and then they leave. And then again, the cycle starts all over again. So there's certainly an impact on the staff, impact on individuals. So if you're managers out there, you've got to really look at this in terms of your staff, but you also have to look at it for yourself. And often, we're the last ones to figure it out in ourselves, because we just, and I'll go over a slide that shows, what the things we tell ourselves to just keep going. It leads to behavioral changes. So you have a lot more, when people are burnt out, you have a lot more interpersonal conflict and grievances. You have lower morale, you have higher turnover, people leave, so you have a lot of talent drain, productivity tends to drop. Frankly, it's been shown that injuries and accidents increase as a result of burnout. Obviously, it's an impact on managing your clients, whether they be patients or customers or families or anyone. Certainly, burnout is going to affect them. It's basically impacting everyone's mental and behavioral health. So it's a significant issue that needs to be addressed. And what I'm going to try to do here this morning is kind of lay out what the significant issues and challenges are, and then present you with what some of the experts have said are ways to deal with it, both organizationally and as an individual. And then I'm going to kind of finish up and talk about, what do you need to be mindful of in terms of your own self-care. So that's kind of the way, now that I've given you kind of framed the issue in terms of the numbers and the impact, let's talk about a few of the other impacts of this. So interestingly enough, there was a study that came out from the Surgeon General of the US, Dr. Murthy. And that came out only 2 months ago. I think it was May 24th, if I can remember the exact date. So they put out a very extensive report on burnout in healthcare, in the healthcare workplace. So they looked specifically at healthcare and healthcare workers. Obviously, with the impact of the pandemic, this has become much more prevalent and much more upfront, and something that people are looking at. And we as healthcare workers, we tend to look at this as, what's the impact on us? How is that going to affect our patients? So you've got all the behavioral changes that come along with being impacted by burnout. You've got, frankly, a lot of the diseases that are pretty prevalent in our society: insomnia, heart disease, diabetes. Heart disease and diabetes are the numbers 1 and 2 incidents of disease in most populations. Then you've got, the behavioral health impacts. Isolation may lead to anxiety, substance abuse, and depression. It impacts our relationships. And then we just get exhausted because we just keep pushing ourselves to provide the care that other people need. So we're giving so much of ourselves that in many cases, we're not taking care of ourselves. Obviously, it has an impact on the patients and clients that you work with. It has an impact on the healthcare system itself, both macro, meaning everybody, and micro, the particular organization that you work for. You've got shortages of healthcare workers, especially during the pandemic. A lot of people left. You've got retention challenges. You've got services that may have to be cut back because you don't have staff. Obviously, that's going to increase potentially your chance of error and malpractice costs and other costs associated with providing appropriate staffing as well. And then, it has a larger impact. Sometimes we're so caught up on the micro that we don't look at the macro, but the Surgeon General is concerned about, the impact of the healthcare system and burnout on society. There's an erosion of trust because people go in and they're not getting what they need. They're trying to pull everything they can from a workforce that just doesn't really, in some cases, have as much to give as they like. And then, obviously that can lead to, poor population health outcomes, health disparities among certain communities and populations. And, we've certainly seen how unprepared we were for the pandemic. Uh, Everything I read says that this is not the only healthcare crisis we're going to experience. So are we prepared for the next one? With burnt out workforces, you have to question whether or not we're going to be able to handle the next one, especially if it comes on the heels so quickly on this one. Okay, so remember I said a lot of the studies have shown that 50% or more of the workforce is burnt out. Well, right here, you can see that. In case you can't see, I'm going to move it here. Look at that, 49% of people who left the healthcare workforce since early 2000. So this was done only last fall. 49% of it is because people were burnt out or overworked. Certainly, the pandemic accelerated this, but people who either as a result of the pandemic or just as a culmination of their career with the pandemic kind of pushing them, we find that people have left. So that 50% number has stayed fairly static over the years, and certainly the pandemic was no help. Interestingly enough, my observation, and many of yours possibly too, is I saw in the early, when we had the Great Recession in 2007, 2008, 2009, I think there were a lot of people who were approaching retirement age in healthcare who, because of financial stresses, just couldn't leave then. Okay, so they stuck around, and the financial crisis kind of dissipated a little bit, and they said, okay, this isn't so bad. You know what? I'm building up my retirement and so forth. And then what happened is, at least from everything I've observed and read, when the pandemic hit, that's when people said, you know what? I stuck it out for the last, 12, 13 years. Enough. I'm done. I'm burnt to a crisp. I can't do this anymore. And that's when you really started having, the Great Resignation, which, interesting enough, is showing signs right now, at least everything I've been reading in the last 2 weeks, of at least slowing down a little bit. But certainly what we haven't seen slowing down is a lot of the older healthcare workers, people in their 50s, 60s, and maybe even 70s, who said as a result of the pandemic, you know what, I'm done. I can't take this anymore. This is too stressful. Now it's time for me to really retire. So those may have put it off 15 years ago, now are saying enough. So frankly, it's brain drain. We're losing a lot of experienced people. And that's certainly a challenge for the profession. But and what happens when you have burnt out caregivers? People just behave more irritably. They just, in some cases, they just have had it with dealing with patients, even though it's something that we got into this profession and we love. Dealing with patients, dealing with clients, dealing with other staff. It's like the cup is full. I can't do anymore. And then ultimately that impacts patient care, client care. We just don't have as much to give. And there are people obviously that range from, fairly routine issues to pretty severe issues in their mental or physical health. And, people who are giving that care just don't have as much to give. And then, from the patient satisfaction standpoint, which is, which as we know is critical and most of us measure on a fairly regular basis, patients are less satisfied when they know the staff is burnt out. One of the things that I always tried to do when I was in healthcare, along the lines of making sure that we had good patient satisfaction, is get the staff not, if you want to vent, about staffing, if you want to vent about your stress, if you want to vent about your burnout, come to me. Let's talk about it. Let's see if we can, provide you with some, short and perhaps long-term solutions to it. And we always encourage people not to tell the patients, not to tell the clients, look, we're just short-staffed today, because then they lose confidence in our ability to be able to do the work that we're charged to do. So, but look, some people can't help themselves. It bleeds in to the workplace, and people are just so burnt out. They say, I really apologize. We normally have X of us. Today, we only have Y, and I apologize for the wait. but we'll get to you when we can. So that impact on the caregiver, as well as those being given care to, is pretty significant. And, thus the pervasiveness and the scope of the issue. Just a couple of quotes that I found that, you could come up with lots of these. I love the little box there where the fuel gauge is just on empty. But burnout is a painful affliction of good people who are otherwise trying to give their very best. So, one thing about burnout that I think is important to recognize is it's nobody's fault. It's a little bit like unconscious bias. I do a lot of work on unconscious bias, and people try to, point fingers and put blame. No, it just is. It happens because of a series of environmental and individual stress points that just get people to the point where they can't function in a positive manner anymore. And incidentally, that quote is from Herb Freudenberger, who is well known for the 12 phases of burnout, which I'll touch upon in a little bit. Another quote, burnout is when somebody just feels depleted from doing the task at hand. It happens when the demands being put upon you exceed the resources you have. The tank is empty. And I think at some point in our careers, we've all experienced empty tank syndrome. Just, we've had enough. I've got to get away. I just can't give anymore. And I'm sure we've all felt like the person on the left, where you just want to hide and wave the white flag. And it feels bad. We feel bad when we feel burnt out, and then it just plays into that cycle, which I'll talk about in a minute. So look, I always like to define my terms. Any of you who have worked with me before know that I like to do that. So let's talk about clinical and non-clinical definitions of burnout. And the best ones I found are from a guy named Hendricks with his group, who's done a lot of work on burnout. Clinically, burnout is a reaction to chronic stress. That's a key word there, chronic, that involves negative interactions between the environmental and personal characteristics. So that's a pretty key piece there. It's kind of the amalgam, or the putting together of both environmental and personal characteristics, which would lead to burnout. It's uncontrollable, negatively perceived events occurring over a period of time. So that's another thing about burnout. It just doesn't happen overnight. It's usually cumulative. That leads to 3 negative psychological responses: depersonalization, or kind of stopping caring, emotional exhaustion, and then feeling a lack of personal accomplishment at work. People feel like they're just on the hamster wheel and spinning it, and they're not seeing the kind of results that they want to see. So clinically, that's what burnout is. Non-clinically, it's a chronic condition that develops when one is working too hard for too long in a high pressure situation. And I don't know about you, but for the most part, having been in healthcare of some kind for most of my career, I think we can all agree that just about everything we do is a pretty high pressure situation. So, when we feel like we're depleted, when we feel like we've been doing this for a while, when we feel like we're not getting the positive feedback that really got us into this in the first place, and when our cup is just full, what's going to happen? Something's got to give, and we're going to feel like we just can't do it anymore. And we do feel these burnt out. So look, again, along with the definition, I want to talk about some of the signs and symptoms, and we may know them, but look, they're physical, they're emotional, and they're behavioral. So burnout plays itself out in, you're physical, you're ill, you're sick, you just can't kick that cold, you're tired, you got headache, you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, or you're eating too much. Then you've got the emotional signs. It's just that feeling that you have that, I'm done. I can't do another thing. The things that I used to look forward to aren't there anymore. And I just can't see, the forest through the trees. And I'm just feeling completely disengaged and dissatisfied. And then, so what's going to happen? I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to be irritable. Sometimes I need the help of others. Other times I just want to be alone. Could certainly result in excessive alcohol or drug use. It plays itself out in attendance, either coming in late, calling in sick, leaving early, or frankly being, physically there, but not mentally there. So it certainly has physical, emotional, which play itself out in behavioral ways. And it's just, a difficult situation to be in. And when you have more than one of your staff who are feeling this all at once, it's just a recipe for extreme difficulty. So you say, well, you know what, I'm sort of this, I'm sort of old school, and we all experience stress, and we just have to suck it up, and that's what we did back in the day. Listen, I've heard that. There might have been even a time when I said that, but as I've gotten to know more about this, I've realized that burnout is I like to consider burnout stress cubed, right? It's like when I talk about management and leadership, I say leadership is management cubed. It's taken that much to a higher extent. That's exactly what burnout is. It's stress to the extreme. It's you pile stress on top of stress on top of stress on top of stress. And when you have prolonged exposure to that stress, it just leads to, anxiety, depression, irritability, detachment, which, I'm sure everybody at some point has felt that. And it's an awful feeling. Here we get into this helping profession because we genuinely, really, honestly, sincerely want to help people. And that's why we got into this in the first place. But you know what? I've had it. I can't listen to one more thing from my staff, from my clients, from my patients. And you just feel, what I'm doing is meaningless. I can't even handle this anymore. Certainly to the extreme, it could result in your ultimate demise. Hopefully we don't get to that point. We recognize it and then we reverse it. And then we, exercise some degree of resilience. But it's not just the old, can't you handle stress? It's stress to the extreme. It's stress that keeps getting exacerbated on top of it's one thing after another, after another, after another. You can probably think about things even in your own work life or your personal life where, okay, you start the day and you've already got 2 sick calls. Then on top of that, you have a new patient who you haven't, or a new client you haven't dealt with before. So you have to do intake on that. Oh, and by the way, you've got stuff happening in your personal life. Your kid is in the hospital having an operation. Your mother or your father is elderly, and you just got a call that they that the aide hasn't shown up. And what are they going to do? And how are they going to help you? And your boss is giving you more directives because you know what? We're really struggling, and we've got to make budget, and we've got to get a wider client base. I'm sure, frankly, me talking about these things just starts to bring back that stress I used to feel on a daily basis. And I'm sure I'm saying things to you that you absolutely can relate to. It's just at some point for anybody, and frankly, it turns out to be everybody, it's just too much. So that's where stress, okay, we recognize we've gotten into a field that's pretty stressful to begin with, but nobody wanted or frankly expected burnout when we got here. So it's problematic. And look, there is stress and there's burnout. And it's a matter of degree. So you see on the left side, you've got certain things that are regularly associated with stress, less energy and certainly anxiety. But on the right, you've got, which is why it's in that sort of burnt orange, because you feel burnt out. It's helpless. It's depression. It's being completely disengaged. And in many cases, it leads to boredom and cynicism. I mean, one thing I've noticed certainly in the workplace over the course of the last couple of years is there's a lot more cynics. I mean, frankly, I think as a society, we've become a little bit more cynical as well. But certainly when you're experiencing burnout in your job, you're certainly going to be, very cynical, and your commitment is really going to wane. Quite honestly, as I said, this is always a combination of individual and environmental. So interesting enough, Maslach, who does, if you want to really look at a lot of great work on workplace burnout, or read a lot of the Maslach stuff. In fact, Maslach has created the Maslach Burnout Inventory, which sometimes I've administered myself, just to get people a feel for where they are on the burnout scale. So lots of research that she and her colleagues did, and they identified 6 mismatches between a person and a job, or the person and the workplace, that can really lead to burnout. And they are, not surprisingly, a lack of control, insufficient reward or appreciation, a lack of community in your workplace where you feel good about the people you work with, an absence, or at least a perceived absence, of fairness, conflict in values between what you're doing and what you believe in, and then ultimately really just that the work being pulled upon you where it's overloaded. Those are conditions in the workplace that are ripe for burnout. I kind of put together a list of a lot of the things that I've seen and that I've read about in my research. I've seen, and you can look at them, and none of these should be a surprise to anybody. Lack of control, dealing with power dynamics. I keep telling people, even people that I work with who are CEOs, everybody has a boss. If you're CEO and you think you're the ultimate boss, no, you report to a board of some kind. So everybody's got a boss that they have to deal with. There are always power dynamics that are at play. Some workplace environments are more or less dysfunctional than others. Sometimes it's just a poor job fit. When I do a lot of work on managing people and their performance, one of the things I talk about is, check to see if there's a good fit between the person and the role, or is it just something else that is preventing them from performing well. Life stressors also play a role. Exhaustion, boredom, overloaded, overwhelmed. These are things that I think all of us have experienced and have witnessed our staff experience, that is just pervasive and frankly difficult to watch, and even more difficult to experience. So again, this is a combination of environmental and individual. So what puts you at risk? Well, there are personality factors. I've known plenty of people who are perfectionists in my life. I fortunately am not one of them. I've always learned that there's so much stuff that good enough is good enough. There are people that I've met who are pessimists. There are people that I've met that are workaholics. Those are personality traits that would put people at greater risk for burnout than others. Then you have people that have both themselves and of the people to whom they report unrealistic expectations. People's work ethic, just, I got to be there from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. The individual's relationship to work, how strong you identify it. And if you feel that you're disengaged or not being productive, what does that do to your psyche? The regular everyday stresses at work, the stuff that comes up, the people you have to interact with, the difficult employees you have to work with, the lack of staff, your own work habits. And then, if you don't have a support system at work or in your personal life, that can certainly get you out of work-life balance pretty quickly. So, you've got environmental and you've got individual all coming together that, puts you in a perfect position, if you will, for burnout. Now, I know all of you are dedicated. Certainly I was. And what do we do ourselves to tell ourselves to keep going? So I found this great site that said, the lies we tell ourselves. Now, I'm not going to read each one of those, but I can virtually guarantee that you have probably at some point in time said this to yourself. I'm fine. Don't worry. You know what? I just need to, go home tonight, have a drink, and then I'll be fine after that. Or, you know what? If people will just let me do my job, I'll be fine. The other thing is, the pointing fingers. It's not me, it's everybody else. So, we tell ourselves these things, and it just prevents us to some degree to really look at ourselves and to do things that might help us heal. So, we keep going. Healthcare workers are just, it's in their very fiber. I got to keep going. I got to help my patients. I got to help my colleagues. I gotta. And then, this finally then presents those multiple stressors in layers that just ultimately lead to burnout. So how do I know if I'm burnt out? Well, let's explode this. Take a relaxing, stress and work-free 2.5 days off. Do the things that you're supposed to do physically. And how do you feel? Okay, boom. Another idea. Take 2 weeks off. Apply the same test. How do you feel after 2 weeks? And boom, number 3, if taking time off really can't reverse it, then you've really got to look at some other pretty heavy things to determine how you can come back and change some of your approach, some of your lifestyle issues, some of your personal issues, some of the ways you approach work. This will usually give you a pretty good indication, at least according to a Psychology Today article. And when I found that those little explosions, I thought that was kind of cool to kind of portray it in that way, because it really does feel explosive when you're feeling on the verge of burnout. You may already be burnt out if you dread going to work, you can't wait to leave, you really have difficulty concentrating, your patience is just at its limit. Even when you first walk in, you feel unappreciated in the work that you do, and you have little capacity to try to appreciate others. You're having physical issues like nausea, like vomiting, like headaches. You have a constant feeling of exhaustion. You say to yourself, oh, if I can only get a good night's sleep, but you're so stressed out and you're so burnt out that you can't even get a good night's sleep to try to get some respite from the way it is you're feeling. You feel exhausted all the time. And you know what? Every day is a bad day. That's when you certainly may be at the breaking point of burnout. And this ultimately, oh, yes, the 12 phases. Really interesting stuff here from Freudenberger and North. And I literally took this out of a magazine and duplicated it here. If you wonder, I just talked about some of the issues that may help you determine whether or not you are experiencing burnout yourself. But if you want a little bit more detail, go through Freudenberger's and North's work on the 12 phases of burnout. The symptoms can be mild to severe. They don't necessarily occur in order. People go through them and they cycle back and they fall back, or they skip phases. It's easier to, according to them, cure if you catch it early enough. And certainly the warning label is, if you don't catch it, you're going to find yourself there. You're going to find yourself at 12. So, you might start at 1, where, we all want to do really, really well, and we're just going to work harder. And who cares what I need? And I skip lunch, and, and then I have to stay late. So I skip dinner. I miss out on my family. I miss out on things. I miss out on my kids' sports. I even forget what my values are. I deny everything. I can keep going. I'm super person. I can get things done, and then, but you know what? I look forward to the drive to and from work, because there's nobody there to bother me. I'm there by myself. My spouse has been telling me that I'm a little bit more irritable and short-tempered lately, and then certainly if it really spirals, you feel that empty feeling, depression sets in, and then you're in full burnout mode. So an interesting way to at least portray the phases of burnout, to try to determine where you are, and then hopefully be able to reverse it. Why don't people just get help? Well, people are afraid, right? They don't want to be seen as weak or a whiner. They fear it may affect their job or their career. Like a lot of us, that we feel it's just a normal part of work. Yeah, stress, that's what it is. We never see how much we're really just piling one on top of the other that ultimately leads to burnout. You just kind of, you tell yourself those lies that we talked about earlier. I can deal with this. I've always dealt with it in the past. I'm super person. I don't, this stuff doesn't happen to me. This things happen to other people. You may not have support, or maybe you're in an organization that really doesn't provide support. And you don't get support from outside of work. And then, again, you tell yourself lies. You bargain with yourself. If I just make it through next month, things should get easier. Or, you know what, I could see my vacation at the end of August, and here we are in the middle of July. You know what, if I can just get there, it'll get better. P.S., you probably need help if you're looking at that already. And it's just a matter of, what things we can do to try to help ourselves. Ultimately, I think we all feel like this plug right here. I thought this was the perfect analogy for burnout. What's the end result? We feel like we're this outlet that's stuck with all these charges that we feel constantly is moving us. We don't even feel that we can possibly relax. We're in this overstimulated state all the time. And then we have chronic overload. We feel exhausted. We're cynical. We're detached. We feel ineffective. We feel we can't accomplish anything that is really workable. And ultimately, there we are. We're at burnout. Now, whether this has happened to you or whether you've seen this happen to your staff or your colleagues, I'm sure everybody has experienced something like this, or at least getting close to this at some point in your career. So, here is the challenge. Here is the issue. And we're there. We're at burnout. Pretty difficult place to be. So I've tried to frame the challenge. I've tried to frame the issue for you. So you're burnt out, or somebody you know is burnt out. How can we develop solutions? How can we help? How can we figure out how to help others, help our environment at work, and help ourselves? So look, problem, solution. So hopefully these are some ideas that you'll take and expand upon. And obviously I can't go through everything in our brief period together, but hopefully it'll give you some ideas. So look, what can be done about mental health at work? I don't know how many people have worked with mental health first aid. I've done it. I've done the class a few times. They've come up with some ideas to help people with their anxiety at work. One thing you can do is really educate employees and managers about mental health challenges and health conditions, so they can be on the lookout to see if their employees are, just experiencing normal stress, or if they're on the way to a real burnout and a mental health crisis. Promote a work environment that acknowledges that people have mental health issues and the supports that we can offer to be able to help people through these difficult times. If you have corporate resources like an employee assistance program or some kind of well-being program, that is great. A lot more organizations are moving in this direction, and a lot more organizations are really genuinely trying to remove the stigma of mental health from the workplace. I think it's a lot more interesting enough. I've read a lot of articles that say that millennials and Gen Zs are much more likely to tell their managers, the people that they work with and for, look, I'm stressed. I'm having a real mental health crisis. I need to take some time. And then, create that opportunity for optimism that, yes, we've seen this happen with people and you can recover from it. So, these are pretty important steps that you could do in the workplace. Remember, right now I'm talking about the workplace and kind of the macro things that you can do to help. The Surgeon General, again, put out pretty intensive study on burnout in the healthcare workplace. And among the suggestions are from this study, uh, making sure that the culture in your organization is responsive to the boots on the ground, to the healthcare workers' needs. You've got to try to understand what they're looking for and try to meet those needs. Remove that stigma of negativity around mental health. Actually, I heard one person recently when I was at a client. One person said to me, "Oh, we were all in a group meeting, and when we were going through from an HR standpoint, the number of people that were on leave of absence and the reasons for it, I saw one of the older people when we mentioned, mental health leave. I saw one of the older people rolling their eyes. Don't they realize this is something that's very real in the workplace now? And again, it's kind of an old school view of mental health. All you got to do is toughen up, and it'll be fine. But I think we've hopefully become more enlightened and gotten beyond that. But there still is some old school thinking in organizations. Looking out for the health, safety, and well-being of all healthcare workers, both from a standpoint of feeling safe in the workplace, so it's safe and secure work environment, as well as all the things that people would expect from a job that has decent pay, provides for leave, provides for good benefits, provides for family-friendly benefits and policies. And then, a lot of this has to come from the healthcare community itself, recognizing this, kind of taking the lead for companies at large by saying, look, we're in this every day. We recognize it more, and we're going to be the leaders in trying to do this stuff for our employees. Also other ideas are, we know we all have tremendous administrative burdens. That's how we get our reimbursement. But is there a way to try to reduce some of that? I know some organizations have begun to hire scribes. So some of the administrative burden is lessened from certainly their physicians, their nurse practitioners, their PAs. And then, the social connection between people within the organization, having peer support, having team-based models, so it doesn't feel like it's all on me, supporting that whole team concept that we can help each other. And then, globally investing in public health and the public health workforce, making sure that we're providing support, making sure we're providing enough staffing, making sure we're providing educational opportunities so more people will want to go into this field, from a number of different settings. So, these are big picture global types of things that the government has come up with. I didn't even read the whole report because it's rather extensive, but I read enough of it to say that, this is a really good first attempt to try to educate the public as to what the issue is and how we can help resolve it. So, you and your organization, one of the first steps is creating that environment that I talk about this all the time when I do my leadership and management work. One of the key things that leaders and managers do is create an environment that people want to work in. So how can you create that supportive environment? I recently read a very interesting article on the Harvard Business Review on creating a healing physical environment. What does that mean? Areas for quiet, much more natural light coming in to the building. So it's redesigning buildings, doing things like that, having people have quiet places, or at least places, they call it off stage, so they can kind of go and decompress a little bit. People have to show an active interest in mentoring and coaching people and not letting them just flounder. And I know this puts a big burden on managers, but this is something that we found has really helped retain people when they can learn and grow at work. Ensuring the right fit between the employee and the role, providing clear expectations and not guessing, trying to take the guesswork out of things, build on strengths, but also, help with challenges, manage workloads. Sometimes we don't recognize how overburdened people may be. So how can we manage that in a way that's workable? And it's not always possible, but, just being cognizant of that, recognizing the symptoms of burnout. And again, I know we're watching out for our staff, but you got to make sure you're managing and supporting yourself as well. Okay. So these are some of the more environmental things. Now, looking at the burnout curve here, let's talk about your individual recovery from burnout. So, many of you here, I'm sure, are leaders in the organization. How do you, and I've gone through some of the things that environmentally we can look at in terms of our staff, in terms of what we're doing for our staff, in terms of providing a healthy and supportive environment for our staff, being able to provide input that from experts who, look, I often tell supervisors, if you're not qualified, don't handle this yourself, but at least recognize it and know where the resources are for the people who are in a better position to provide support for people. So, reversing the burnout curve, especially when you see yourself starting to get to that bottom of the pendulum, what can you do to kind of climb out of it? And, a lot of it is mindset. A lot of it is mindfulness. A lot of it is optimism. A lot of it is, taking responsibility for what you can take responsibility for. So, and I'm going to explore some of these things when you're really looking at yourself to try to help yourself through, these most difficult times. And as you've seen with your clients, and I'm sure you've seen with your staff and yourself, when you're in it, it's much harder to recognize it, pull back, look at what you're doing, perhaps come up with some solutions. It's not a failure to ask for help. Sometimes you need somebody to reflect upon what it is that they see, and then you can't always do it yourself. You need some others to help with you, but at least you need to take those first steps, and these are some of the things that hopefully I'm going to talk about here today in the second part. So how do you deal with burnout? You got the 3R approach. This is typically, and you can read about the 3Rs in several different places. But the 3R approach starts with recognizing that, look, I know the warning signs, and I'm there, or my staff is there, or I'm perilously close to burnout. Number 2, I've got to then reverse it. I've got to stop it in its tracks, and I've got to figure out what I need to do to let myself feel less burnt out. I recognize it's realistic to understand there's always going to be stress, but can I manage it in a way that's effective, where I'm not going to go down that path where I'm feeling completely disengaged in what I'm doing? And then ultimately, you've got to build your resilience, which I'm going to, talk a little bit more about. I think resilience is a really important thing. I think we've really, throughout the pandemic, we've learned how important resilience is. And I just want to explore that a little bit with you, because there, I think, are elements you can do to really enhance your own personal resilience. So let's define it. It's the capacity to recover from difficulties and to bounce back. It's the ability of something to spring back into shape. It's being elastic. Some back in the day would probably call this mental toughness. And to some degree it is. It's not toughing it out, though. It's recognizing that I'm in a tough place and I've got to be mentally tough enough to know that, and then to start doing things for me that are going to help me pull out of this thing. And, all the experts say that certain factors will help with resilience, including optimism. I've met plenty of pessimistic people. I prefer to stay away from them as much as I possibly can. I really, when I do a lot of my management and leadership work, I talk about effectuating optimism, being a role model, being positive, looking at things as challenges rather than problems, looking at things that, let's try to work on figure this out together. So it's not just you, having that positive attitude and approach, the ability to use your emotional intelligence and to regulate your emotions in an effective way for you and for your staff. And, the ability to see sometimes failure as a helpful form of feedback. So, these are all things that'll help with resilience. And you've probably seen this before, the domains of resilience: vision, composure, reasoning, health, tenacity, and collaboration. they're all pieces where, you've got to have realistic goals. You've got to keep your composure. You've got to, use your mind and reason through this as much as you can. Make sure you're doing the things that'll keep you healthy. And then, having tenacity, having optimism, having the knowledge and the drive and the motivation to bounce back, and then recognizing you don't have to do this alone. So let me collaborate with others to help me through. The most important step in coming back from burnout is resilience. How can you do that? Prioritize self-care. When you're there, you've got to say, you know what? I've got to do things that I know make me feel less stressed, less burnt out, and I have to prioritize those things. So, and there are lots of things that I'll give you some tips in a little bit. You probably know most of them. Eliminate the people and the things that suck your time. Okay, that's a really good way to be resilient. Identify those and try to eliminate them as much as you possibly can. Setting boundaries is a really important thing to eliminating burnout and to exercising resilience. You have to know when to say when. And a lot of us really aren't good at that. All I can say is we have to start getting good at that. Otherwise, we're really no good for anybody. Find meaning in what you're doing. Delegate, especially when you're managers. Delegate when you can. I know, you do it best. I do it best. I had to do it because nobody else could do it as good as I do. But you know what? This is how you get burnt out. And you know what? Sometimes you have to let go of certain things and delegate that responsibility. Think optimistically. Sometimes you got to restructure things, even if it's just your time, even if it's just your approach, to try to, feel like, okay, I can manage this. I can bounce back. A lot of this is just exercising self-compassion, being good to yourself, being kind to yourself, connecting with people who make you feel good, being mindful of where you are and where you're at so you can put yourself in a good place and you don't just go down the rabbit hole. It's been shown to make people much happier, much less stressed, and therefore, exercise resilience. One thing I found is really helpful. It's remarkable, and I'm sure a lot of you know this. It's remarkable how important self-talk is and how self-talk can bring us down or how self-talk can bring us up. And, when I really learned, and I only learned a few years ago, when I say a few, maybe, 12 or 15 years ago, about self-talk, and I was able to quiet myself and really listen to what I was telling myself, I realized, wow, these are really destructive thoughts. So how can I reframe this? How can I recognize that I'm speaking negatively? How can I challenge myself to think more positively? And how can I reframe those thoughts to a much more optimistic approach towards getting things done? In other words, just like, the old IBM, how can I think differently? And I find it really helps. So rather than your inner voice telling you, beating yourself up, saying, I could have done better, what if I'll never be able to? Maybe you can change that inner voice to say, you know what? I have successfully done this before. Maybe not exactly this, but I have confidence that I'm going to figure this out. And then, you know what? I am scared and I can manage this. So I'm not going to just be scared and tuck myself into a ball and run away. I'm going to do the best I can to try to figure out. So if you can start just reframing that inner voice to be much more positive, I think that can really, really, really help. And then the last piece of resilience, along with the reframing and the self-care, is showing appreciation and showing gratitude. I in my career, certainly I've had my share of setbacks. And when I've had something really difficult, I found that, when I exercise gratitude for the things that I did have, it really helped my mental state and helped me at least, look to get, there was a point in time I was laid off, and, my first thought was panic, right? And, you work your way through phases, but I said, I got to get a job pretty quick. One of the things that I did, at least that helped me, was I showed a lot of gratitude. I convinced myself that I had a lot and I had a lot to offer. And therefore, I know I can do this again in the future. And it took a few months, but I think it really helped me at least be in the right frame of mind to look for something else. Do good things for others. Do good things for yourself. Appreciate the positive things in your life. And, those meaningful connections. I know something that I've been doing over the course of the last few months is a lot of the people that I kind of lost touch with during the pandemic. I've reached out to them. I've tried to find out how they are. I've actually scheduled some time with them. So, it's a great way to remind yourself how meaningful these connections are, and, how you can really, they can help you and frankly them in their own outlook. So, another thing in terms of you is, do you have work in the right perspective? And I like to, when I do a lot of these workshops, ask a series of questions that you can ask yourself to see, whether or not you're in the right place. If you're in the right place, but maybe your mind isn't in the right place, or, am I in the right place? Meaning, do I have to look for something else because there's just a real disconnect between my values and what's going on here? Do I need to make changes? Just again, you'll get the slide deck. You'll see the questions. I would suggest you ask yourself these questions, and just sit back, kind of, I like to call it, pull the camera back, ask yourself these questions, do a searching and fearless moral inventory, and figure out, where am I and how can I do better? A couple of suggestions. I know we all multitask. Everything I've read about multitasking says it's awful. It's the least productive thing you can do. So I know while we tend to do that, at least the way I've tried to do is I try to chunk things out a little better. I try not to do too many things at once. What I'll do is I'll say, okay, I'm going to take 10 minutes to do this. I'm going to take 30 minutes to do this. I'm going to take 15 minutes to do this. So at least I give my focus and concentration to things rather than try to do too many things at once. Set limits. You've got to be able to say no. Otherwise, you're headed for the city of burnout. All right. Seek support where you can get it from trusted friends and colleagues. And, always seeking that work-life balance. It's something that I think many more people are focused on now. And hopefully many more of us will prioritize. Making work meaningful, just from a standpoint of a lot of pretty key research that was done from my old alma mater. I got my master's degree from Rutgers University. Maybe that's why I was focusing on this. But to make work meaningful, here are some key issues according to this big study that was done out of Rutgers University, probably about 20 years ago. That when you feel your work is meaningful, it means you can make a significant impact on others. When you're intellectually challenged and the stuff isn't the same all the time. But you know what? Every job has boring pieces. As a friend of mine used to say, I try to stay away from administrivia as much as I can because it bores me out of my mind. But even if there's something that's boring, try to make it fun, try to make a game out of it. And then, some people have really dove into a specialty where it kind of invigorates them, where they used to be a generalist and they have certain things that they know they have to do, but if they dive into something that they're really interested in, it kind of, reinvigorates them. So that's, these are just suggestions on really making work meaningful. So you kind of pull away from burnout and rediscover what it is that you really liked about being in this field in the first place. Last but not least, we're coming down the home stretch. I know you have questions, so I'm going to leave time for them. But I am going to implore you to practice self-care in whatever way that is. Eating your fruits and vegetables like your mom told you years ago, taking a walk, hanging out with trusted friends and colleagues, being mindful, and it could look for you like it doesn't look for me. But, are you showing self-compassion? Are you positive in your outlook and your approach? Have you been able to work within boundaries, say no, and manage your time well? Are you trying to change your negative self-talk so it's much more positive? Are you making time for yourself? Are you breathing enough? Oh, that felt good. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating right? Are you exercising more? Answer probably no, but I'm working on it. And for me, a lot of this is about finding the balance. We all got to do stuff. It's when can we balance stuff for us, stuff that's not going to overwhelm us, stuff that we have to do for our work, stuff that we have to do for our families. How can we then, put some kind of parameters around that and say, enough, I've got to have time when I can recharge my batteries. According to Gallup did a really interesting study. You notice I bring Gallup up a lot because I really like working with them. I think they're the best survey company out there and do a lot of really interesting work. Is you practice well-being. What does Gallup say goes into well-being? Having purpose, which we've talked about, having supportive social relationships, having some financial security, which a lot of us are struggling with now, especially the way the economy is, but at least work towards getting there. Having a sense of community where you are in your life, where you work, and physically feeling good and making sure that you're healthy. Those are all elements of well-being. If you can practice that on a regular basis, I think you'll be well on your way to at least ending the burnout cycle. And caregivers, well, listen, we're the worst at this, right? So for caregivers, some special tips, you can look at this, but certainly, you have to find ways for respite and practicing self-care. Keeping that positive perspective are three of the keys, from this particular chart that I pulled, because we are the ones who become all consumed in what we do. What we do is all consuming. And I think we have to take special care of ourselves when we're in healthcare, when we're providing care for others, because just so much of it, we give so much of ourselves, we've got to be willing to give back to ourselves and exercise that self-care. Here are some tips. These things, but sometimes we forget. So just here are some tips to manage stress on an everyday basis. Here are some tips to avoid burnout. These are things you've heard before, but I'm a big believer in repetition, because sometimes it doesn't get through the first time. The people who don't eat lunch, I never could understand. For me, that was always two things. Number one, I know me, and I know by 12:30, 1 o'clock, I'm hungry. I don't want to get hangry. So, I'm gonna get lunch, and it gives me a little break. It's something to look forward to, a little island of meanness, not meanness, me-ness, when I can just say, what, rest of the world, I'm taking my lunch break. Okay. Know when you're tired and stop. For those of us like me that were in HR, my time was, okay, after 5, when the phone stops ringing, except the people who figure out I'm after 5 and ring the phone then, what, I need to know when I'm done. And believe me, I've had my share of 7, 7:30, 8, 9, 10 o'clock nights, but I had to know when I was done, because I was not going to push myself beyond the realm. So, find out what works for you. These are tips, right? It's not going to work for everybody. Find out what works for you and then do it. So what are your favorite coping techniques? Because that's what a lot of this is. When you feel overwhelmed by stress, when you feel like you're headed to burnout city, what do? Eat, drink, shop, do some healthy things like walk, television vegging. That's a big one for me, but frankly, it got my mind off things and I loved it. Do you get a massage? Do you phone a friend? Do you just want to get away? Everybody has different techniques, but what I would urge you is find out what works for you to reduce your stress and to avoid burnout. So learn what makes you feel burnt out. Learn the things that for you work to reduce burnout. I'm an incessant list maker. So sometimes I'll just make here more lists. There it is, making sure I covered things today. So I make a list of those things and remind yourself, put them in your top drawer, put them on your cork board, put them on your computer. Just keep that list close by. And when you feel yourself getting there, remind yourself, don't go here. All right. Get some fresh air and move. That universally really helps people with stress. Breathing also helps people with stress. Putting things in perspective when we're really sucked in, that's really hard. So trying to put things in perspective really does help. A lot of that is that inner voice, that self-talk that will help you. And listen, just as you can be talked into stress, I believe you can be self-talked out of it. So it's just a matter of breathing, recognizing some things, knowing that you can call upon some things you've done in the past that have been terrific. Remind yourself of those and tell yourself, I've done it before, I can do it again. Help other people where you can when you're not burnt out, because a lot of people go through this. And then, when you start to feel burnt out, go back to your list. Because ultimately, let me tell you something. I'm a big believer in what this life is, what our work life is. What this is all about finding your balance. So if you can figure out how to find your balance, what leads to burnout, things that work for you that can avoid, or if you're heading there, things that you can do that will prevent you from getting to that point. If you can find that balance, I think you're in great shape. Okay. I want to thank you. A little commercial for me here for a lot of the stuff I do. Perhaps I worked with some of you in the past, but I do a lot of this work, and I do a lot of HR consulting as well as a lot of OD work. So if you want to get in touch with me, I'd love to hear from you. Okay, I think that's it. Daniela, there seem to be a lot of people who have put things in the chat, but I would have been too distracted if I read them. And so
that is correct. We have had quite an active chat box here while you were talking. So I have a few questions that came in early on, although many people are asking about slides and recording. So I'll address that right off the bat. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll have access to download the slides as well as to watch the recording. We'll post it on our website probably by Monday. So please check back by Monday. And everything should be posted on the NIAPRIS website by then. So first question for you, Glenn, is it considered burnout when the why that we got into what we're doing is no longer there? So when you lose that passion for what you're doing, is that what we call burnout?
Well, I think it could, that's a really good question. And I've been asked that before. I don't think it has to get to the why. There are lots of people that still are passionate about what they do, but there's just been one stressor on top of the other stressor on top of another stressor that has just led to you feeling disengaged. That said, a lack of passion for what you originally got into this is a reason for burnout. It's not the only reason, but when people have lost the passion for what they've done, it may be time to start looking for something else to do.
All right, thank you. Next question. So when we're talking about feeling overwhelmed, how do we speak up without retaliation? So you were talking in the beginning a little bit about like when you're feeling overwhelmed, there's lots of stuff happening on the job. How do you speak up without, feeling like there's going to be some retaliation?
Well, that's always dependent upon the organization that you're in, the organization culture, what your kind of relationship is with your supervisor. One of the things that I always try to preach to leaders and managers is how important it is to have an open door policy, how important it is to not point fingers, how important it is to be completely supportive of your staff. And that doesn't mean that if there are issues that you don't address them, you have to. In fact, one of the worst things you can do is to ignore these issues. But you have to hope that there's somebody in the organization that has enough empathy to understand what you're going through. And even if it's not somebody in the organization, one trend that I've noticed is that there are a lot of organizations now that are outsourcing their EAP because there are people that don't feel that if the EAP is internal, that it's going to be confidential enough. So if your organization has an EAP, I recognize an EAP is a short-term solution, but they can usually provide referrals, some quick help, and then referrals that can help you look at some of the bigger picture issues that may help you to exercise your resilience.
And that actually it's like you were reading my mind, Glenn, because that leads us to right into the next question.
Aha.
So someone asked, where can employees turn so that they can address levels of stress and perhaps burnout as well? So we had some kind of back and forth in the chat box a little bit about this as well. Some folks chatted in, contact your EAP. I know that some agencies, insurance plans have wellness programs you can take advantage of. I know
True.
other employers that have like full on wellness activities and days planned and all kinds of cool things that they do for their employees. I wonder if you could suggest anything else we may have missed.
No, I think those are all good ones.
Okay.
The health, I've seen some success with health benefits plans. Some organizations have literally wellness programs that are over and above the EAP where they can
Yep.
get, I think you mentioned they can get points for doing certain things, or there are just tips or referrals that people can do. Because look, sometimes, burnout, let me just say this, burnout doesn't have to be the end of the world. Burnout is a place that you've reached. But as I've said, you can exercise resilience. There are lots of people that have turned it around. Sometimes people can do it on their own. Sometimes people need a little help. It's recognizing when you're there or when you're damn close that you need to seek out and figure out whether I could do this on my own or whether I need help.
And even, just to go back to what you were saying about health plans and things, like I know some insurance companies even will pay like, a gym membership or reimburse you for those kinds of things. And those are all kinds
Correct.
of wellness activities that we can do to help ourselves sort of feel better and get some of the stress out. So,
Right.
Another question that just popped in, how do you suggest helping others with burnout when you have little control yourself over the things that they identify?
Yeah,
That's
one, I do a lot of work with emotional intelligence, EQ, and having empathy is a really important thing. So, at the same time, you have to exercise some degree of self-regulation. So you can't just, spit out anything that comes to mind. Remember, if you're a manager, you represent the organization. You have to keep the organization in a positive perspective. At the same time, I've never been. I firmly believe leaders have to be authentic. Leaders can't fake it. Okay, and so having that empathy, understanding where people are coming from, providing either resources for them, the same ones that you might go to through your workplace, or offering up your time. You need a place to decompress, come into my office. Most people will not take over advantage of that. You got to hope people do take you up on some of those suggestions. The other thing is give people suggestions. I've had people who I could just see were up to here when I was, VP of HR or senior VP of HR. And I'd say, you know what, let's go take a walk. Or, you know what, I'm taking you to lunch. Or, you know what, let's go get a coffee. Just to kind of get away from where you are now, change your perspective, hopefully talk about, I'm a big sports guy. So I'd go, hey, what about those Mets? Sorry, Yankee fans, I'm a big Met fan.
I was going to say that might bring more stress to people, but
it might, well, especially when you're a Met fan,
right.
know from stress. But just changing the topic, talking about themselves, talking about their family. I think that's let's go Mets. I think that's a great way to help other people.
Yeah, and just sort of bring them out of that space for a little bit, right?
Exactly. Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah.
So before people go down the rabbit hole, get them away from the rabbit hole.
Exactly. Yep. And give them some peer support, right? That's what my efforts is all about.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So there's a question. How do we get CEs? So Keith Hernandez, that's very funny. Is today the 17th? No, it's the 14th. Okay.
Keith Hernandez Day. That was last Saturday.
All right. So questions about continuing education. So you'll receive in the email that you use to register for today's event, you'll receive an email with a link to a form for to an evaluation form. Sorry, I couldn't get the word out, to an evaluation form. So just click on that link, fill out the form, and let us know which CE you'll see. There's a check you can check off which ones you're looking for, and we'll be able to send those to you. And it usually takes us about, give us about 45 to 60 days to process those, because we've got lots of CEs for lots of events that we do. So please be patient for that. But we are happy to do LMSW, LCSW, CPRP, and LMHC continuing ed credits for today. So lots of stuff, great chats about how wonderful this was. I know somebody's raising their hand, but we're not able to unmute today just because we have so many people on the phone. So I didn't see who it was that raised their hand, but if you can chat in the chat box, that would be most helpful.
Well, anyway, I just wanted to, I frankly, I love the Mets comments. So thank you.
There's a lot of them coming in. Look what we started.
Talk about having a community of support. It's great to see. I also want to thank you for doing this. I'm sure I missed a lot of the comments along the way. I hope I can see them if they're being recorded, because I would have loved to see what people were saying along the way. But I thank you for listening. I thank you for your attention. I thank you for wanting to learn more about burnout, and hopefully I gave you 1 or 2 or 3 little hints that are going to help you and your staff going forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Glenn. Always a pleasure to work with you and to hear from you. And thanks to everyone on the phone today or on the Zoom with us today. I hope this gave you a little bit of a break and gave you a little bit of self-care that you can take with you for the rest, at least for the rest of today. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you hopefully again soon. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.